So the funny thing about doing an exceptional job on a project is that nobody actually gives you a moment to breathe. Instead, you usually just get handed the unresolved baggage of the person sitting next to you, right? This is an almost invisible transaction that happens every single day. You save a volatile account that 3 other directors managed to completely misread, and by Thursday morning, your reward? A calendar invite to clean up an entirely different mess in the company's European market. There's no formal reallocation of resources here either. Just that polite, slightly desperate knock on your glass door. Hey, I know you're slammed, but you're literally the only person who can smooth this over. It's a masterpiece of psychological theater. You get a temporary hit of validation, and in exchange, the organization gets free insurance against its own bad design. We should probably call it what it actually is: the competence tax. The corporate narrative loves to paint reliability as a foundational virtue. They look at you during annual reviews and talk about leadership pipelines and carrying the flag, right? Sound familiar? But the physics, right? The physics of the room are a lot more primitive than the handbook suggests. An enterprise is a fluid system, right? It naturally directs the weight towards the point of least resistance. If you happen to be the component that never slips under a heavy load, the system doesn't stop to preserve your gears. It just applies more torque until you either break or recalibrate. And frankly, from a pure operational standpoint, it's highly efficient to run a functional asset to its absolute limit before spending the political capital to deal with the 9 people who are coasting, right? Now, think about the person on your team who is famously difficult to work with. The one whose spreadsheets always have broken formulas. Their client calls require a permanent handler, right? And notice how the system slowly, quietly stops asking them to do anything critical. Their perimeter starts to shrink. Their deadlines get softened, and they get insulated from the high-stakes rooms because it's just too exhausting for leadership to manage that person's mediocrity. So now we wonder, where does that unallocated friction go? Well, it gets routed directly to your desk. By remaining hyper-capable without really setting a premium on your output, you're essentially subsidizing the low-utility players around you. You become the structural glue keeping a flawed architecture from showing its cracks. And as long as those cracks stay covered, the enterprise has absolutely zero incentive to fix the underlying problem. Now, when people find themselves trapped in this specific loop, they usually default to the standard exhausting playbook. They schedule a meeting to talk about boundaries. They adopt the soft, predictable vocabulary of modern burnout culture, right? As if the problem is just a lack of mindfulness or a poor relationship with their inbox. But this isn't a wellness issue. It's a standard math problem, okay? Your system is permanently expending more energy than the structure is allocating to actually sustain it. High agency players don't solve a math problem by complaining about the numbers. They introduce a little bit of strategic maneuverability and friction. They understand that the only way to force an organization to rebalance itself is to let a few minor non-essential plates actually drop. This is usually where the highly reliable professional loses their nerve. The mere thought, right, of an unanswered email or a delayed secondary report gives them a mild case of vertigo. But you have to learn to distinguish between a load-bearing wall and a decorative tile. If a peripheral update goes missing for 48 hours, the company doesn't miss its quarterly targets. What happens instead is that the room is suddenly forced to experience its own weight. When you step back and allow that tiny controlled drop, the leadership tier finally has to look at the actual source of the drag. And they realize that the machine wasn't running smoothly because of their brilliant management. It was running because you were actually manually holding the wires together, right? So the goal isn't to become difficult. It's to become a scarce resource rather than a public utility, okay? Everyone takes the electricity for granted until the lights flick off on a Tuesday afternoon. But a scarce resource is budgeted carefully, right? It's insulated from frivolous use. Amateurs like to show their worth by showing their exhaustion, right? They want everyone to see them running down the hall, right, looking frayed, holding 3 phones. It's a very low-status aesthetic. Real weight always carries a certain degree of ease. When you refuse to match the frantic, breathless cadence of the middle tier, you're sending a much more potent signal. Think about that. You're demonstrating that you control the volume of the room. It does not control you. So, why not let them speculate about where your ceiling actually is? Keep a permanent, unallocated reserve of cognitive capacity completely off the organization balance sheet. That reserve is what funds your equilibrium. So let's leave it here today. The next time a piece of orphaned work comes sliding towards your corner, wrapped in that familiar, flattering language about how you're the only one who can fix it, do not automatically reach out your hands to catch it. Just pause, look at the apparatus, and decide whether you're actually building something substantial or if you're just paying the tax for a room that hasn't learned how to carry its own weight. Stay steady and let them pay the market rate for your utility. See you in the next one.